I did it to her. Something she'll remember for the rest of her life. She couldn't sit for days. She thought she was stronger than me. She thought I was weak. But in the end, it was her begging me to stop. And it's entirely her fault. She's the one who put me in that position, sitting in my car, watching as she walked into that house. The betrayal wasn't just hers. There were others, people I trusted, people I called friends. They all thought I'd never find out. But they were wrong. And when the time came, justice was served in a way they'll never forget. Okay, let me introduce myself and our marriage first. My name is Victor, and for most of my life, I've been the kind of man others look to for leadership. I'm not just confident. I'm deliberate, disciplined, and deeply aware of the power I carry in every word and action. I run a successful investment firm, command respect in any room I walk into, and I've built a life most people would envy. And then there's Isabel, my wife. A vision of beauty and sophistication. Isabel is the kind of woman who turns heads wherever she goes. Her smile could stop a conversation, her laugh could start one, and together we were a power couple in every sense of the word. Our relationship wasn't built on weakness or dependence. We thrived because we matched each other. She brought the fire, the charm, and the unpredictability, while I brought the strength and steadiness that grounded us both. Or so I thought. For years, we lived a life that felt almost too good to be true. Lavish parties, intimate dinners at home, shared passions that kept our connection electric. I saw Isabel as my partner, my equal, the one person who understood me completely. But lately, something's shifted. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. Isabel began to pull away, not physically, not at first, but in ways only a man who knows his wife as deeply as I do could notice. The look in her eyes when I spoke to her seemed distant, her touch less frequent. I chalked it up to stress, the natural ebb and flow of any long-term relationship. But then came the other signs. A phone call she took in the middle of the night. Her voice hushed and hurried as she slipped out of the room. The faint scent of cologne on her clothes that wasn't mine. The unexplained work dinners that stretched late into the evening, leaving her phone suddenly out of reach when I tried to call. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. After all, Isabel adored me. She said it every day, showed it in 1,000 little ways. But my instincts are sharp, honed by years of negotiation and survival in a cutthroat world. And those instincts told me something wasn't right. I didn't act on it immediately. That's not my style. I don't confront until I have the facts, and I never let emotions cloud my judgment. But deep down, a fire was beginning to stir. A quiet, smoldering anger that came with the realization that my perfect marriage might not be so perfect after all. For now, I watched, waited, and measured every move. The truth would reveal itself, and when it did, I'd be ready. After all, men like me don't lose. And if Isabel thought I would, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday, one of those evenings where the rhythm of life felt almost predictable. Isabel had been unusually cheerful all day, humming as she moved around the house, a little extra spark in her step. I didn't think much of it at the time. Isabel's moods could shift with the wind. But as the night settled in and she excused herself to shower, something caught my eye. Her phone, sitting unlocked on the counter. Now, I'm not the type of man who snoops. I've never needed to. Our marriage was built on trust, or so I believed. But something about the way she'd been glowing that day, the way her laughter had seemed just a little too easy, made me pause. My instincts whispered that there was more beneath the surface, and I've never been one to ignore them. I picked up the phone. At first, there was nothing out of the ordinary. Texts from friends, a calendar reminder for a meeting, photos from last weekend's party. But then I saw it. A message buried in a thread with a contact named Sam. Looking forward to tonight. You always know how to make things exciting. My grip on the phone tightened as I stared at the words. They weren't overtly damning, but the tone was unmistakable. My first thought was that this Sam might be harmless, maybe a coworker, maybe someone from her book club. but something about it felt off. Too intimate. Too familiar. I scrolled further, but the thread was clean, carefully so, as if someone had made sure to leave no obvious trace. That only fueled my suspicion. By the time Isabel stepped out of the shower, wrapped in a towel and glowing from the steam, I was seated at the kitchen counter, her phone back where I'd found it. She smiled at me, completely unaware, and poured herself a glass of wine. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I watched her closely over the next few days, noting every little thing that felt out of place. Her laughter seemed louder when she talked to certain friends on the phone. Her perfume a little heavier when she left for her so-called work meetings. She started coming home later, with vague excuses and an energy that didn't match the story she was trying to sell. It wasn't just her actions, it was her whole demeanor. The Isabel I knew had always been playful, flirtatious, but there was a shift now. A spark I hadn't seen in years, but one that no longer seemed directed at me. One night, I casually asked about her plans for the week. She mentioned dinner with her friend Julie and a couple of networking events. Her voice was light, casual, but her eyes flickered just enough to betray her. Julie. A convenient name, a convenient excuse. I didn't let her see my doubt, but internally, I began mapping everything, her movements, her stories, and the increasing gaps between them. If there was one thing I knew, it was this: Isabel was hiding something. And if she thought she could outmaneuver me, she was about to learn how wrong she was. The cracks in her facade were growing, and soon, the whole thing would shatter. When betrayal threatens your life, you don't act recklessly. You don't confront out of anger or desperation. You watch, you wait, you hunt. I spent the next week in silent observation. Every time Isabel left the house, I made a mental note of her excuses, her tone, her movements. She was careful, I'll give her that, but no one is perfect. The more I observed, the more her inconsistencies began to stack up like a house of cards, ready to collapse. It was Friday evening when I decided to follow her. She was dressed to kill. An elegant black dress that clung to her curves, a necklace I'd bought her for our anniversary glinting at her throat. She told me she was meeting Julie and a few others for dinner downtown. Her tone was breezy, her kiss on my cheek as she left the house light, almost dismissive. I waited 10 minutes before grabbing my coat and keys. The predator in me was wide awake now, my senses sharp as I trailed her car from a safe distance. She didn't head downtown. Instead, she turned toward the upscale part of the city, where mansions stood like fortresses behind iron gates. The streets were quiet, the kind of wealth that thrives on discretion. Her car pulled up in front of one of the grandest homes, its lights glowing warmly against the night. I parked a block away, stepping into the shadows as she rang the bell. The door opened, and a familiar figure greeted her with a smile that made my blood boil. Anthony, my business partner. Anthony was a man I had trusted for years. A sharp mind, charming demeanor, and a knack for closing deals. Seeing him welcome Isabel into his home, his hand lingering on her arm as she stepped inside, was like a knife to the gut. And it wasn't just him. As I moved closer, staying hidden behind the wrought iron fence, I caught sight of another couple arriving. Mark and Sarah, close friends of ours. Or so I had thought. My fury built with every passing second. Isabel had always been the center of attention, but seeing her slip into this den of deceit, surrounded by people who smiled to my face while stabbing me in the back, was something else entirely. The party inside was intimate. I could hear faint laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the low hum of music. Whatever was happening behind those doors, it wasn't just dinner. But I didn't act. Not yet. Revenge, like business, requires patience. If I burst through those doors, I would lose the upper hand, show my cards too early. No, I would wait. Let them think they had the advantage, that their secrets were safe. As the hours passed, my mind worked overtime, piecing together the implications of what I'd seen. Isabel wasn't just unfaithful. She was part of something bigger. something orchestrated. When Isabel finally emerged, her hair slightly tousled, her laughter lingering in the cool night air, I was ready. She drove home, none the wiser that I'd been watching her every move. When I returned home later, Isabel was already asleep, curled up in our bed like nothing had happened. I stood there for a long time, staring at the woman I thought I knew, the woman who had become a stranger. The hunt had begun, and now it was only a matter of time. If she thought I would crumble, she didn't know me at all. Predators don't break. They strike when the time is right, and my moment was coming. The night I watched Isabel step into Anthony's mansion, I knew I needed more than instinct. The predator in me demanded precision, and precision required evidence. The following morning, I contacted an investigator I trusted, a man who thrived in the shadows, gathering truths people didn't want revealed. His name was James, and he had a reputation for being thorough. Within hours of our meeting, he was on the case. It didn't take long. Isabel had grown arrogant, careless in her deception, believing herself untouchable. Over the next week, James pieced together a web of lies and depravity so tangled it almost seemed fictional. Her outings weren't simple affairs. They were part of an underground sexual circle, a playground for the wealthy and bored. And the players weren't strangers. Anthony, my business partner, wasn't just a participant. He was a central figure orchestrating the debauchery. Mark and Sarah were involved too, as were a few other familiar faces from our social circle. James handed me photos and video clips, grainy but damning. Isabel wasn't just unfaithful. She was gleeful in her betrayal, fully immersed in this sordid game. Seeing her smile in those moments, surrounded by people I once trusted, ignited a fury I hadn't known I was capable of. But the final blow came when James uncovered something deeper. The group didn't just indulge in their escapades, they mocked me. I was the fool, the oblivious husband they toasted to in their private gatherings. Anthony, ever the showman, had even joked about how easy it was to deceive me. It wasn't just sexual betrayal. It was humiliation. I sat in my office that night, staring at the pile of evidence James had provided. The predator in me wanted to strike, to tear them all down in one explosive move. But another part of me, a colder, calculating part, knew there was a better way. The proof wasn't just a weapon. It was a tool, and I would wield it with precision. The first rule of revenge is to stay calm. Let them believe they're in control, even as you tighten the noose. I didn't confront Isabel. Not yet. Instead, I started planting seeds of doubt within her circle, beginning with the women, the wives of the men involved. If Isabel's lovers thought they were untouchable, I would make them feel the ground shifting beneath their feet. My first move was subtle. An impromptu lunch with Anthony's wife, Clara. She was elegant, sharp, and just as entrenched in our social circle as Isabel. Over drinks, I casually mentioned the mansion party I had seen Isabel attend. Funny thing, I said, swirling my whiskey. Isabel mentioned she was meeting Julie that night. But I'm sure I saw her heading toward Anthony's place. Must have been mistaken. Clara's smile faltered, her fingers tightening around her glass. Anthony? Oh, I'm sure it was nothing. They're always planning some surprise or another. Her voice was light, but her eyes betrayed her unease. Perfect. From there, I visited Sarah, Mark's wife, under the guise of business advice for a project she'd been planning. Midway through our conversation, I slipped in a comment about how Isabel and Mark had been spending so much time together lately. Mark always says you're his rock, I said with a smile. It's admirable how trusting you are. The paranoia was palpable. One by one, I planted these subtle insinuations, leaving just enough ambiguity to let their imaginations do the work. I didn't accuse anyone outright, that would come later. For now, I wanted them unsettled, questioning each other, questioning Isabel. And it worked. Within days, I began hearing whispers through our social circle. Clara confronted Anthony about the mansion party. Sarah asked Mark why he'd been so secretive. Tensions were brewing, and cracks were forming in the facade they'd so carefully built. At home, Isabel remained oblivious to the storm I was creating. She carried on with her double life, unaware that her once loyal allies were starting to unravel. The beauty of mind games is watching your prey destroy themselves before you even deliver the final blow. The pieces were moving exactly as I wanted. And when the time came, I'd deliver a reckoning none of them would forget. This was no longer just about revenge. It was about reclaiming control of my life, my dignity, and my name. The house was quiet when I arrived home that evening. Isabel was in the living room, curled up on the sofa with a glass of wine, flipping absent-mindedly through a magazine. She looked every bit the picture of a perfect wife, poised, graceful, and utterly unbothered. But tonight her mask would drop. I loosened my tie, my footsteps deliberate as I walked into the room. She glanced up, smiling warmly, but something in my expression must have given her pause. "Victor," she said, tilting her head. "You're home early." I didn't respond right away, taking a moment to pour myself a drink. The clink of the glass against the counter felt deafening in the silence. Then I turned to face her, my voice calm but heavy with intention. "We need to talk." Isabel froze for a split second, a flicker of hesitation in her eyes before she masked it with a casual laugh. "Sounds serious. What's on your mind?" I didn't sit down. Instead, I leaned against the fireplace, studying her like a predator sizing up its prey. "I know about the mansion," I said. Her smile faltered. "And I know about Anthony," I continued, each word cutting through the air like a blade. "And Mark. And the others." Her face went pale, her hand gripping the stem of her wineglass. For a moment, I thought she might deny it, but then her lips curled into a smile, cold, calculated, and infuriatingly smug. "Well," she said, setting her glass down and leaning back against the sofa. "It seems you've been busy." I stared at her, my fury barely contained. "How long?" I demanded. "How long have you been humiliating me behind my back?" She didn't flinch. Instead, she crossed her legs, her tone dripping with arrogance. "You make it sound so dramatic, Victor. It's not like I planned this to hurt you. It just happened." The sheer audacity of her words made my blood boil. "You didn't plan it?" I repeated, my voice sharp. "You're part of a sexual ring with people I trusted. You mocked me, Isabel. You all did." She shrugged, her eyes glinting with something almost defiant. "You're strong, Victor, but even you couldn't stop me. Do you know what it's like to live in your shadow? To be the wife of Victor, the man who always commands the room, who always gets what he wants." Her voice grew sharper, her emotions finally spilling over. "You're so busy being admired and respected, you didn't even see me slipping away. And maybe I liked it, the freedom, the thrill. You can't control everything, Victor." Her words were a twisted attempt to justify the unjustifiable, and as she spoke, my anger shifted. It wasn't just rage anymore. It was cold, calculated resolve. "You think I didn't notice?" I asked, my voice low, controlled. "You think you were clever, sneaking around with them, laughing at me behind my back? Isabel, I knew long before you realized I was watching." For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. But she masked it quickly, her tone still mocking. "What are you going to do, Victor? Yell? Cry? Divorce me and tell everyone what a terrible wife I've been? Go ahead. It won't change anything." I stepped closer, towering over her as I met her gaze. "You're right. It won't change what you've done. But I can promise you this. What's coming will leave nothing of the life you've built. Not your reputation, not your lovers, not even the freedom you claim to cherish." Her bravado faltered then, the full weight of my words sinking in. "Victor," she started, but I cut her off. "No," I said firmly. "You've had your games, Isabel. Now it's my turn. I left her sitting there, her confidence crumbling as I walked away. I didn't need to yell or throw accusations. The storm I was about to unleash would speak louder than any argument ever could. This wasn't just revenge anymore. It was war, and I intended to win. Revenge, like any successful enterprise, requires precision, strategy, and patience. If Isabel and her lovers thought they could humiliate me, they were about to discover how wrong they were. One by one, I would dismantle their lives, leaving nothing but ashes in my wake. The first target was Anthony. We had built our businesses side by side, though I always suspected his success came with more than a little creative accounting. It wasn't hard to find the cracks once I knew where to look. Using my connections in the financial world, I had his accounts audited. The skeletons in his closet weren't just plentiful, they were catastrophic. A week later, Anthony's name was splashed across every major business publication. Fraud allegations rocked leading investment firm. Overnight, his reputation crumbled. Clients pulled their funds, regulators came knocking, and within days, his firm was on the verge of bankruptcy. Anthony wasn't the only one on my list. Mark, smug and self-assured, believed he could walk through life untouched. But his confidence was his greatest weakness. Through a well-placed conversation with his wife, Sarah, I revealed his betrayal. I didn't need to show her every detail, just enough to plant the seed. Within days, Sarah filed for divorce. Mark, blindsided and desperate, tried to reach out to Isabel for support. I made sure she was too distracted by her own unraveling world to offer him anything. The others fell just as swiftly. Small nudges in the right places. A whispered word to a superior here, a leaked photo there, set off chain reactions that dismantled careers, marriages, and reputations. As their lives crumbled, whispers of a reckoning began to circulate through our social circle. No one could prove I was behind it, but the fear was palpable. Every move I made was calculated, every action leaving just enough ambiguity to keep them guessing. Even Isabel seemed on edge, her once confident demeanor replaced by nervous glances and hushed phone calls. But I wasn't done. Because all of this, Anthony's ruin, Mark's divorce, the others' downfall, was just the beginning. My ultimate goal wasn't just to destroy their lives. It was to destroy their legacy, their illusions of power and control. And Isabel? She wouldn't escape unscathed. Not after what she had done. Not after what she thought she could get away with. She didn't know it yet, but her greatest humiliation was still to come. But before it, there's one more thing to do. Strip Isabel of the facade she so carefully maintained. I planned the party to perfection, inviting every key figure in our social circle. Isabel, oblivious, was in her element, greeting guests and dazzling them with her charm. She had no idea that this would be her final stage performance. As the night progressed, I called for a toast, the crowd falling silent. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I began. "Tonight is about truth, and some truths can no longer stay hidden." The mood shifted instantly. I revealed Anthony's fraud and Mark's betrayal, each word met with gasps and stunned faces. Then I turned to Isabel. "And my wife," I said, my voice steady and deliberate, "who thought she could betray me and mock me behind my back." I held up the folder containing the damning evidence, photos, texts, and more. For those who believed her lies, here is the truth. The room erupted. Isabel's mask shattered as her shame became public knowledge. The whispers turned into glares, her allies abandoning her one by one. As I walked away from the chaos, I knew this wasn't the end. Her humiliation was complete, but her final punishment was still coming, and it would ensure she never forgot what she had done. Isabel and I no longer lived together. After the public humiliation, she packed her things and left, retreating to a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. She didn't beg me to take her back, not after I made it clear she had no place in my life, but I knew she still clung to the remnants of her pride. She thought she could rebuild, reclaim some measure of control over her shattered existence. She was wrong. I learned about her appointment with the specialist by chance. A stretch mark removal procedure she had been waiting months for. Vanity had always been Isabel's weakness. Even now, after losing everything, she couldn't resist the urge to perfect herself. The moment I found out, I saw the opportunity. The specialist, renowned for his work with elite clients, had a reputation for discretion. It didn't take much to convince him, just the right amount of money and a promise of secrecy. He wasn't thrilled about the idea but agreed once he realized how much it was worth to me. On the day of the appointment, Isabel arrived at the clinic, her demeanor poised as ever. The specialist greeted her warmly, his professionalism masking what was about to unfold. She lay down, none the wiser, as he began his work. But there was no laser machine that day. Instead, the specialist carefully inked a tattoo, one that would mark Isabel forever. The design was brutally simple. The words "Victor's property," etched in elegant script across her lower back, just above her buttocks. The placement was deliberate. It was hidden enough to remain private in most situations but placed where it would be undeniable in moments of intimacy. When the session ended, the specialist wrapped her in bandages, explaining the usual precautions and aftercare. Isabel left the clinic thinking she had just taken another step toward restoring herself, completely unaware of what had truly been done. Days later, I received the call I'd been waiting for. Her voice was frantic, trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief. "What the hell did you do, Victor?" I smiled, leaning back in my chair. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't play dumb with me," she screamed. "You bribed the specialist. There's a tattoo on me. It says..." Her voice cracked, unable to finish the sentence. "Victor's property," I finished for her, my tone calm. "Yes, I know. It suits you." "You had no right," she shouted, her fury barely masking the humiliation in her voice. "No right," I said coldly. "After what you did, you think you have the moral high ground. You humiliated me, betrayed me, and flaunted your arrogance. Now, every time you look in the mirror, you'll remember who you really are. My property. My mark on you forever." Her silence was deafening. I could feel her struggling to come up with a response, but there was nothing left to say. "You wanted freedom, Isabel," I continued. "You wanted to live without consequences. But freedom doesn't come without a price. Consider this the cost of your betrayal." She hung up, and I leaned back, satisfied. I knew the tattoo wasn't just a physical mark. It was a psychological one. Every glance at herself in the mirror, every time she undressed, she would see it. Every moment of intimacy with someone new would be tainted by the words etched into her skin. And while Isabel might try to rebuild her life, she would carry that mark as a constant reminder that she had crossed the wrong man. The final punishment wasn't just about revenge. It was about ensuring she could never escape the weight of what she had done. Isabel was no longer part of my life, but I had left my legacy on her. Forever, Isabel was ruined. Her lovers abandoned her. Her social circle shunned her. And whispers of her betrayal and humiliation spread like wildfire. Desperate, she came to me, broken and begging for forgiveness. "Please, Victor," she pleaded, tears streaming. "I need you. I can't do this alone."
Isterte her, unmovid.
"I forgive you," I said, my voice cold. "But you'll never be part of my life again." She left, defeated, knowing she had no power over me anymore. With Isabel out of my life, I reclaimed my pride and doubled down on my success. Anthony's downfall left gaps in the market, and I filled them effortlessly, solidifying my dominance. Professionally and personally, I thrived. I built stronger connections, pursued my passions, and embraced a life free from betrayal. Respect was mine again, earned through calculated strength. Isabel's life fell apart. Every door closed to her, socially, professionally, and personally. The tattoo was her permanent shame, a symbol of what she had lost. Once adored, she became invisible, her once perfect world reduced to rubble. I reflected on my journey, the revenge that had consumed me. While I was satisfied with the outcome, I couldn't ignore the cost, the loss of a woman I had once loved. Still, I knew I had done what was necessary to rebuild myself. Moving forward, I built a better life, stronger and wiser. I met someone new, someone loyal, grounded, and genuine. With her, I began a chapter built on trust and integrity, finally free from the shadows of the past.